Now, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome tonight's special guest. Monika Henreid comes to us. She's certainly a renowned actress, author, and filmmaker in her own right. Right now, she happens to be on the East Coast of the United States. She's been down at the Humphrey Bogart Film Festival in Key Largo, Florida, and she's on her way from here to New York and then off to Morocco for the huge 75th birthday party for her dad's iconic film, Casablanca. But Monika brings a unique perspective to programs like this because, yes, she can speak to her father from the daughter's perspective, but she also worked with her father on a number of his projects, from assistant director to production manager to even actress. So she can speak from that viewpoint as well. And we're just so delighted that she's with us tonight. Joining her is a gentleman who's no stranger to fans of River Run, Dale Pollock. Had a very distinguished career as a producer in Hollywood before he came to Winston-Salem to become the founding dean of the filmmaking program at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And we all owe Dale a great deal of gratitude because it really was his vision that brought a fledgling 3-year-old film festival from Western North Carolina and gave it its permanent home in Winston-Salem, and that is what we know as the River Run International Film Festival. So without Dale, there wouldn't be a River Run here. So anyway, please join me in giving a huge River Run Retro welcome to our special guests, Monika Henreid and Dale Pollock.
Well, it is really an honor to be up here with the very distinguished and lovely Monika Henreid. And by the way, the first thing I had to look up was how to pronounce this name. It is Henreid.
Absolutely.
There we go. I remember for years I would say, Paul Henreid. He's not French.
He's not French, but a lot of people assume that, and a lot of people did pronounce it Henri. And there is actually a story behind that, like there is a story behind most things.
Right.
When he first came to the United States, he did fortuitously end up doing a play on Broadway at the same time a film that he had done in England a few years before was showing. So his name was in lights twice on Broadway, or almost literally across the street from each other. And a French-Canadian, I don't want to say disc jockey, but interviewer from a radio station interviewed him, and he was French, and so he immediately eliminated the H, and my father became Paul Henri, who he never was. But
He was born in, well...
He was born in Trieste, which was then the Austro-Hungarian.
And now it's in Italy, so... All right, so, you know, we know that your father was in 2 of the iconic Hollywood classic films, Casablanca and now Voyager, which we're screening in just a little while. What quality do you think Hollywood filmmakers saw in him? Because he came out of this European background, had done a few films in England, but did not have the sort of Hollywood pedigree, and yet he was cast in these roles that were leading man roles in 2 very important films to the studio. What did they see in him?
We should ask that of all the ladies in the audience. He was tall, he was good looking. Okay, past that. At the time, a lot of the Hollywood leading men were joining the military. They were leaving. Hollywood was diminished of leading men, shall we say, and they were looking to the Europeans. Now, the difference with my father and, let's say, Boyer or later Yves Montand and some, what was his name? Well, anyway, the French contingency that was over here. The advantage my father had was he didn't have a specific accent. So he could play, probably, you know, his background could have been anywhere. It could have been Czech, it could have been Hungarian, it could have been Italian, it could have been British, it could have been any number of other cultures coming to the United States, even to the point where they had him playing very American Americans, and he had to learn to undo his accent a bit. But he managed to be able to do that. So between the fact that he was good looking and charming and suave and debonair and all those other things that they wanted for leading men, he was a bit of a chameleon. He could play a lot of different parts.
You know, I was saying to Monica over dinner that when I first encountered him, I believed him as Victor Laszlo that I thought he was Czech. And it wasn't until I did my research that I realized he was Austrian with a German family and a German name. But, and of course studied at the wonderful Max Reinhardt's theater in Vienna before he went to England to make films. I know your father's career was shaped as much by politics as his talent. Can you speak about his views about the rise of fascism and the Nazis in Europe, and then at a later stage in his career, his fight against McCarthyism and the blacklist?
Yeah, it's really a large story. He was told by his father that whatever you do, stay out of politics. Just do whatever you're going to do in your life. At that time, when he was a child, his father died when he was 9. So any advice he would have gotten from him was really as a little boy. But he was told, stay out of politics. If you want to be a doctor or whatever you want to be, just stay clear of that. Which was, of course, ironic because my grandfather was a banker and was one of the financial advisors to the Kaiser Franz Joseph. So maybe he was speaking from experience. But I think, I don't know, again, like life is complicated. It's a complicated question, and so I'm not going to come up with a very easy answer. He did stay away from it when he could, but he was always an outspoken person about what he personally believed in, and that got him in a lot of trouble, many times.
Did the Nazis designate him an enemy of the state?
Absolutely, he was an enemy alien of the Third Reich, absolutely. Yeah, because he refused to sign the National Socialist German Actors Guild pledge
of loyalty to the Nazi Party.
Yes, exactly, he refused. And they had offered him, UFA had offered him a very lucrative contract to become their next young leading man, and he would have had that would have been, his career would have skyrocketed when he was in his early 20s.
UFA at that time was the largest movie studio in the world, in Germany.
Yeah.
And in fact, they said you could take the MGM lot, the Universal lot, the Paramount lot, and the Warner Brothers lot and put them all together, and they were all smaller than UFA.
Yeah, and it was an interesting confirmation, which it's almost comedic except for the fact that it was tragic, and that he was told that he would be blacklisted in all German-speaking theater and motion pictures, primarily motion pictures because it was UFA. But the confrontation was actually with Goebbels, and Goebbels was not a very tall man, and my father was over 6'3", so that was one of those moments where the little guy was threatening the big guy.
Do you think?
Except the little guy was the big guy. You know what I mean? Yeah, of course you know what I mean.
Do you think the passion he brought to Victor Laszlo in Casablanca came from his own feelings?
That was him. I mean, there are moments in the film where I can look at him and I know that comes from the tips of his toes. When the scene in whose office is there? I guess they're in Louis' office, and he talks back to Connie Veit, and he tells them, you can kill me, but how many more will come after? And so, I mean, that's him.
Or leading the Marseillaise, which is one of the great moments.
And that is him singing. That is him singing. Someone said, well, they loop. Yeah, no, that's him, and he meant it.
Yes. And then he's settled in Hollywood, and then comes McCarthyism, this whole hunt for communism in the entertainment industry, and once again, he's faced with a political choice, correct?
I don't know so much that it was a political choice in the sense that it wasn't...
He wouldn't deny his...
He wouldn't deny his beliefs, and his beliefs were very much freedom of speech, freedom of the ability to say and do what you are passionate about in your life. And if I disagree with you, that's okay. You are still allowed to have your say and your beliefs. And being part of the original committee for the First Amendment ultimately hurt him again, because it did flip around on him, and he was blacklisted from the Hollywood system, from the studios. The studios would not hire him.
So, in a way, the threat the Nazis had made against him, that he wouldn't work again, ended up coming true in the least likely place you would assume, Hollywood, where once again he was told, if you don't renounce your beliefs, you won't work.
Right.
And he was blacklisted for how many years?
Well, that time, he was blacklisted for 5 years. But he literally was blacklisted 3 times in 3 different countries for 3 different reasons before he was 40. And now, blacklisted, thank you, blacklisted now doesn't hold the same weight that it used to, because now there's television shows called Blacklisted, and anybody who can't go to a particular store anymore is blacklisted from the store. This meant you could not work specifically in the industry to which your career was headed and blossoming, but you couldn't work in that city, you couldn't work in that country.
And
you were stopped, literally stopped dead of being able to generate an income or pursue your passion or whatever.
You could not appear in films, you could not appear in television, you could not appear on the radio. You were blacklisted from all media in the United States, and as many of their foreign subsidiaries, of course, honored this.
Absolutely.
So if there was a English office for MGM, and you were blacklisted by MGM in Hollywood, you would not be hired by MGM in England either. So it really was a worldwide blacklist.
It was, and earlier than that, when he was blacklisted by UFA and Goebbels, he had already made a few films in Vienna as a young, what you would call a juvenile lead. He was in his early 20s when he made these films. They blacklisted him to the point where they took his name off of the credits of the films he was already in. Now, they couldn't take him out of the film because he was always playing, significant characters.
Right, it's too big of a role.
Yeah, but they could take his name off, and they did.
Just, we forget what this era was like, and the panic that was in Hollywood, and this desperation to basically say, I don't know this person, I don't know what they believe, I just want to keep working, and you had to declare yourself one way or the other.
One way or the other. And as Europeans and as emigres, of course, that was the group that was in our home for dinner or around the pool on a Sunday or on the tennis court. That's who was there. And the who's who of the immigrants, of the literati, of the directors and writers, they were all at our house at one time or another. So that then becomes guilt by association.
Right.
And even if those guests and friends were not communists, it was just assumed that if that many got together and had a picnic in the park, it was going to be some great communist conspiracy, something or another, which of course wasn't the case at all. And there was, in the late 40s, there was actually a curfew. If you were a European immigrant, you had to be home by 8 o'clock in the evening.
During World War II.
In Hollywood, in Los Angeles, yeah.
If you were a writer, you could still work under the blacklist with a front, someone who would take credit. But if you're an actor, you are unmistakable. So the ban on actors was particularly punitive. Directors, other people went to Europe and worked. Your father turned to the independent film market, didn't he?
Well, it came to him. He was unemployable during this time by the studio, so independent producers came to him and asked him if he would do these, films, these independent films.
Non-union.
They actually weren't non-union. Some of them came through Columbia, and some came through Eagle Lion, which was a branch of J. Arthur Rankin.
So the bargain basement studio.
The bargain basement. Well, they called it Poverty Row, actually.
Yes,
They're Poverty Row Studios. And he said no, he couldn't possibly do them because the salaries were so ridiculously low. And then he learned how to negotiate a deal and said, okay, I'll do it for this miserable salary you're offering me up front, but I have to have money out the back end. And it was ironic because these 4 films that he made, one right after another, which he referred to as his popcorn pictures, made more money than any of the others. So, and also taught him how to be a writer and producer and accountant and financier and production manager and everything else. He really learned the ropes of filmmaking, Hollywood style.
And you mentioned his agent was Lou Wasserman, who
Yes.
invented the actors back end with Jimmy Stewart in the early 1950s. He was the very first agent to say to a studio, my client will take less, but he owns a piece of the film. And Jimmy Stewart became a multimillionaire under those deals, and your father also did well.
He did well. He wasn't attached in that way to this film or to Casablanca, but he still did well with the popcorn pictures.
Right. You know, in a sense, it's been said that all Hollywood actors in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s were chattel. They were the property of the studio. Your father had a long relationship with Warner Brothers. How did he get along with Jack Warner, and did he feel like a slave to the studio?
No one gets along with Jack Warner, myself included.
What are your memories of him?
Oh, well, he would come on the stage when we were shooting Dead Ringer. He would come on the stage and be, you know, the guy. He's the guy whose name is Warner, right? He was the man. And luckily, of course, most of the time Betty was there when I was there, and she would just shoot him a look, and that'd be the end of it. But yeah, he was kind of an interesting guy. He was, I think, probably in a previous life, he was like a carousel barker or something like that.
Well,
because he was a great promoter.
Yeah, that was his skill among Warner Brothers.
Yeah, he was
the promoter.
And every time I think about it, it breaks my heart when I think about him jumping on the stage and grabbing the Oscar away from Hal Wallace for Casablanca, because that was so wrong. Jack had nothing to do with Casablanca. It was all Hal Wallace.
Yes. His name was on the logo. And
well,
that's why he jumped up and got that award.
Yeah, and he always, you know, says that thing you see outside, you see that the tower, you see that, what was not the silo, but he says that
was the water tower.
The water tower, he says, that's my name.
Giant Warner.
Warner Brothers, yeah.
Didn't even say brothers, just Warner.
Yeah. Interesting character. He will be remembered, obviously, forever, but for some interesting reasons.
Did your father feel that the studio treated him well, gave him good roles?
No, my father, in my quest to do shameless advertising right now, ladies and gentlemen, in my quest to do a documentary about my father, I discovered a stack of suspension notices because he was refusing to do some of these roles. They really seriously wanted him to be, you know, Jerry in every film that he made. And my father really was an actor. He liked stretching. He wanted to push his own abilities as far as he could. He wanted to play the good guy, the bad guy, the sympathetic guy, the angry guy, the gangster. You know, he wanted to be able to push himself as an actor because he came from that kind of training. So when they would send him another script and another script where the dialogue was almost, you know, cookie cutter the same, he would refuse to do it. And so he and Jack came, to a mutual agreement that they shouldn't be together anymore.
He came to that agreement with many performers. Ultimately.
Jack? Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness, yeah.
Just so you understand the way the studio system worked in those days, you were on a 7-year contract. And every time you refused a movie they assigned you, whatever the shooting time of that film and the post-production time was added onto your contract. So if you turned down both films, all of a sudden your contract was 9 years. Well, Betty Davis at one point turned down so many movies that she was on a 20-year contract to Warner Bros. And she sued and won and broke the system because she said, I signed for 7 years. I have never signed another contract. They have simply extended me for all these films I turned down.
Right.
So the actors who stood up to that had nerve.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And she, of course, was a forerunner of that. She was one of the first, one of the few to stand up to the studio system and just go,
Right.
yeah, you can't do this to us.
Do you think she was an influence on Paul while they were doing this film, in terms of her attitude toward what the studio was making her do? He was relatively new still in Hollywood.
He was new, but his training was as an all-around actor. And when you went to the Reinhardt School or when you were at the conservatory in Vienna, you learned pretty much how to do everything. You had to. You couldn't work as an actor in Vienna if you didn't have a certificate saying that you had passed all these courses. You couldn't. You just couldn't walk in and say, oh, look, I'm so cute, give me the role. That didn't fly at all. You had to prove, you had to show up with a certificate saying that you've been through these classes. So he had, and again, by the time he got to Hollywood, he'd already had a career in Vienna. He had already had a career in London. He had played Prince Albert on the stage for 2.5 years. He had, he had chops. He had his legs underneath him. He knew what he was doing. And by the time he got to Warner Brothers, it's not about feeling good or an ego or whatever. He knew who he was. He didn't question who he was. And I think when he saw her stand up and say, this is wrong, or in her words, this is crap, he kind of felt, oh, okay, maybe it's all right if I say this too. And of course, he and she got along from the get-go. She is the reason that he's in this film. His first film in the United States was a film called Joan of Paris, which he did with Michelle Morgan.
Right.
And by February of '42, she had seen it. And Warner Brothers was having a problem deciding who was to play opposite her in this film. And she said, well, there's this new guy, look at him. And they went, we don't even know who he is. And they got a print, and I don't actually know who saw it, but anyway, on her recommendation or her request, Warner Brothers brought him over from RKO and screen tested him. And what they did, now in Joan of Paris, he looks very natural. He's playing an RAF pilot who gets stranded in France and has a romance with Michelle Morgan. That ain't too shabby either. The two of them on screen, you want to see pretty. Yeah. Anyway, so they bring him over. Instead of letting him be this natural guy with his own wavy hair and his own look, they are trying to turn their, like Warner Brothers, it's a sausage factory.
Right.
They're cranking out a movie every month. Somewhere someone is working on one of on the sound stages. And they slicked his hair back, they put on the thick makeup, they put on the brown lipstick, they put him in the padded shoulders, and they gave him a screen test. And thank God for all of us, Betty actually looked at the screen test. That's not something she would normally do, but she happened to look at the screen test and literally said, who the hell is that? And they said, that's the guy you told. She goes, that's not him. That's not him. Take off the makeup, wash his hair, put him in his own clothes, and let him test again. And they did, and as they say, the rest is history.
That's great.
So,
And they Americanized his character.
They did.
Jerry, right?
Jerry,
Yeah,
yes.
He doesn't feel like a Jerry.
He's not a Jerry. No, he's not a Jerry.
If he had a favorite role, what was it and why was it his favorite? Did he have one
I
that
don't
he
know.
was particularly proud of?
He and I never actually had that exact conversation. I think anything that challenged him as an actor,
It made him stretch.
would be the things that he was pleased with. He loved working with Betty. He was delighted not only with this, but Deception, and then he directed her in Alfred Hitchcock and directed her in Dead Ringer. So any work with her, I think he enjoyed. But it's like, who's your favorite child? I don't know. I think he enjoyed the work. He was a real worker bee. He loved the work. He wanted to do the work. He would do all the research. He would know all the backstories of every character he played. He would usually know the backstories of the characters he was playing opposite. He knew everybody's lines. And when he was directing, and I was, again, fortunate enough to come across his scripts, where he was directing. There are fold-out pages of the blueprints of the sound stages of the sets, and you could see every camera angle.
So he
Matched with
blocked
every,
the movie.
he blocked it out before he even came on the set, and people, you know, like the camera operators, the DPs, loved him because they never had to ask, Mr. Henreid, when would you like me to move the camera? He could open the script and fold this out and say, okay, on this play we do this, and on this one we do this, and then we're moving the camera over here, and then, you know, he was a real professional. And that was part of their relationship. They were both consummate professionals.
Yes, absolutely. I know your father had to fight typecasting his entire career. Early on, he was a sympathetic German, or he was a Nazi henchman, or he was the suave continental lover. How did he manage to reinvent his image? That he was a pirate on the Spanish Main. I mean, he really managed to kind of reinvent himself several times.
Yeah, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it backfired.
When did it backfire?
Well, it backfired when he started playing the bad guys. He had a very large fan base because of this in Casablanca and Deception and a few other films, and The Spanish Main, where he was a very heroic pirate, you know. But which that film was actually his idea. That's a whole other story. But again, it was one of those, he wanted to be an actor. He wanted to stretch himself as an actor. So when he had the courage to walk away from Warner's and walk away from a couple of other studios, he was basically saying, I challenge this. I challenge the fan club. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean to say he wanted to prove himself as an actor. After he did Hollow Triumph, and certainly after Rope of Sand, his fan club just bottomed out because everybody wanted him to be Jerry.
Right.
They didn't want him to be anybody else, and he wanted to be an actor. He didn't want to be Jerry.
He wanted to be whatever the great role was.
Exactly.
I know you worked with your father as an actress and as an assistant director. And can you sum up what you learned from him about how do you tell a film story and get great performances from your cast? And was there something that was at the essence of his approach that you learned something from?
Well, I guess I could start by saying I learned everything from him. Life, love, passion, caring, devotion, courage.
He and your mother were together for
60 years.
Wow, highly unusual in that Hollywood era.
And she was, dare I say, she was the smart one. He was the artist, and she was the one who said, "Yeah, wir machen das. Yeah, we're going to do this. It'll be okay." Whenever something crashed but didn't burn, she was right there with a bucket of water ready to put out the flames and get him back up and going again. And that happened to him a lot in his career. But as far as learning from him, he was a fountain of information. He never, ever wasn't educating whoever was with him. If we drove through Europe, he would stop and say, and this cathedral was built in such and you kind of go, why do you know that? Because he was curious, and he would look it up, and he would inquire about it. And he always said to me, the most important thing you learn is to know where to find the answer to something. And back then, you know, it would have been the Encyclopedia Britannica or the library or something. Now, you know, it's the Google machine, right? You do this and boom, you've got an answer. It's not always the right answer, but you've got an answer. But he almost had that childlike curiosity. He was always looking for answers. He was always looking for things. And he wasn't shy about sharing what he was finding out. He was always giving back information. And his relationship with other actors, aside from the cameramen and the DPs, loved him. The actors loved him because he understood the process that they were going through to try to dig down into themselves to find out how to portray a particular character. The only times I have ever seen him angry, and I saw him angry, nobody else saw him angry. I could look in his demeanor and how he was carrying his body, I could tell that he was angry. But he would be angry and hurt with lazy actors, with actors who would show up and just recite their lines, or even worse, didn't know their lines.
Oh, and act them to a stage actor.
And it was, I mean, that, yeah. You didn't, if you were working with my father or with Betty, you did not show up unprepared.
Right.
Because you were prepared to do what you were supposed to do, and you were prepared to know what they were going to do. Oh, yeah.
And Betty Davis would bite your head off.
Yeah, she would.
Yeah.
She would.
I believe it.
She came after me once for a little teeny tiny thing in Dead Ringer, because it was like almost choreographed. It was put the tray down, get her coffee, turn around, pour the coffee, turn around, get her cigarette, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it was just this very intricate back and forth between and the whole time we're talking to each other, and her timing was such that she wanted to do something in a certain way. And my father said, cut. And she didn't explode or anything like that, but she, she had her moment of this and that, and I kind of walked off the set, like not feeling all that good. And the cameraman came to me and he said, "It wasn't your fault. She messed it up. Just let it ride. Don't tell anyone."
You trod carefully.
Very. But she was, I must say, she was also, if she was your friend, she was the best friend you could have, and she was like my third parent.
Yeah,
I mean, she was
like a godmother.
She was amazing, just an amazing, warm, wonderful, loving friend. If she was your friend, she was your friend. That was all there was. There was all there was to it.
That's great. I know you're making a documentary about your father now.
Oh, good. Shameless advertising.
Yes.
I love it.
What's your goal? What do you hope to show people about him with your film?
Well, basically everything we've just said. And there's so much of his career that nobody knows about or don't realize until, suddenly you see his credits on 29 Alfred Hitchcocks or 9 Big Valleys, or introducing actors like Richard Dreyfuss and Rita Moreno in their very, very first featured roles, either in television or motion pictures. The man himself, the documentary is not about the actor. It's not about his career. It's about the human being. He was an extraordinary human being. He never backed down. He believed in what he believed in. He fought for what he believed in his own way, kind of quietly. He wasn't out there, with a trombone or anything like that, but in his own way. You always knew who he was or what he was thinking. There weren't any, sneaky things left and right or anything like that. But I guess historically, the arc of his life is pretty astounding. And again, like I said to you earlier, he was always in the right place at the right time and the wrong place at the wrong time. So his career and his life was terrific highs, devastating lows, terrific highs, devastating lows, terrific. And my mother was that steady line that ran in between and just kept him going. So it's not even the story about him alone. It's the story of their circumstances and where they came from and how they were raised. He was born, they were both born at the end of the Belle Epoque, the end of empire. My father's father was a financial advisor to the Kaiser Franz Joseph. We could start there. And then the First World War and surviving that, and the Second World War, and who of the family stayed and who of the family got out, and how did my father get his friends out, and what did they do, and how many times was my mother stopped and questioned by the Gestapo, and it's just a story.
This is why Casablanca still resonates. All those issues you just mentioned were real in that era.
They were, and that's one of the things, that's why Casablanca is still played today, and people can relate to it, because it is a story of human emotions, human choices, human sacrifices, people actually talking to each other, trying to work out how they're going to get through a situation, so on and so forth. Somebody asked me at the Bogart Film Festival why I thought it was still a classic, and I said it's very simply people making the right decisions. Not the easy decisions, but the right decisions, ultimately making the right decisions. And that's, and in this also, you have a married man and an unmarried woman raising their child. in the future, looking to the future. It's not politically correct. It's not any number of things. It's certainly not in 1942. But they made the right choice. It would have been wrong for Jerry to walk away completely and leave his daughter there. It would have been wrong for Charlotte to give her up. So they had to figure out a way to make it work. That's why a lot of these stories become classics, because they're stories. They're people working their way through their problems and their quirks.
And this is also a harrowing depiction of parent-child abuse.
Absolutely.
And it was one of the first Hollywood movies that really showed what a parent could do to a child and impact.
This is, again, one of those moments where you just go, thank God for who was at Warner Brothers at the time, with Claude Rains and Gladys Cooper as the mother. I can't imagine anybody else being more precise and more heinous and more devilish than the performance that Gladys gave in this film.
And although Irving Rapper is not the greatest Hollywood director, he was very good with Bette Davis. He was her favorite director. She went back to him again and again.
Do you know why?
Why?
Because she steamrolled him.
Not surprising.
Well, okay, so now we'll tell you the secret behind the 2 cigarettes scene, okay? Oh, you've seen it. Okay. Has anybody not seen this film? That would be so interesting. Okay, then I really shouldn't give it. Well, I'm going to tell you anyway.
That's all right. We can do this spoiler.
Okay. There is a scene in this film where they have to show the intimacy of Jerry and Charlotte without coming out and saying they're having an affair, because he indeed is a married man, and that would not have ever passed the censorship in 1942. Yep. So in the book, in Prouty's book, there is a scene where he does light 2 cigarettes, and it's back and forth, and it was translated into the script. But when they tried to do it physically in a rehearsal, it was all arms and hands and cigarettes and lighting and back and forth, and it was just awkward, and it was difficult, and it just wasn't working. Rapper loved it. Betty hated it, and it frustrated the hell out of my father, because he was the one responsible for getting the cigarettes lit. Okay, so that night apparently he came home. This is all stories I heard growing up. He came home, and he was grumpy. And, at some point after dinner and a little bed talk and whatever, pillow talk, right, my mother said, okay, cough it up, what's going on? And he said it was just a terrible day, and explained what had happened and so on and so forth. And my mother just looked at him and said, why don't you do what we do? So he took it back the next day. He showed it to Betty. Betty loved it. Showed it to Irving Rapper, who hated it. Bette Davis immediately called Hal Wallace, who appeared on the set quite quickly. He loved it. Irving Rapper now is diminished in a corner. And Hal Wallace liked it so much, he literally had it written. He had Casey Robinson put it into the movie more often, because it was only going to be that one time in the original script, which I can prove because I have the script.
Wow.
And, to a certain extent, as they say, the rest is history, but it became one of those things that it haunted my father. I told you that at dinner. I don't know if I should, well, I'll tell you anyway. Okay, I'll tell you everything. In later years, when people, obviously the piece was mimicked and copied a dozen times over and parodied, just so many times. And we were at dinner at some very nice Beverly Hills restaurant, and a woman came and sat in my father's lap and said, light me up, Paul. And he just didn't even know what to think. But she brought her own cigarettes, So. It's crazy, and that's not who my father was. He did not understand American fans. He didn't understand the behavior of American fans. They would chase him down in his prime, after Now Voyager and Casablanca, they would chase him down the street and rip off his suit, literally. They'd shred his suit. So he had all these beautiful Anderson Shepherd suits from London, and he learned to not wear them if he was out in public, because they would just get shredded. But it's, I mean, it's ridiculous. You have this iconic piece of business where you think you'd be so happy and so grateful that your career will be remembered because you've done something iconic. Even to the point, dare I say, that a few years later, Irving Rapper directed a film called The Voice of the Turtle, and I believe he has Ronald Reagan light two cigarettes.
Well, he stole from the best.
Stole from the best.
There we go. All right, I think we're ready for Now Voyager. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.